The Galactic Council chamber fell silent as Ambassador Kythera stepped forward, her chitinous exoskeleton gleaming under the crystalline lights. Around the circular amphitheater, representatives from 47 species watched with barely concealed amusement as she cleared her throat chambers. "The hegemony war has raged for 12 cycles," she announced, her translator rendering her clicks and whistles into standard galactic. "The HFY hegemony has consumed 17 worlds, enslaved billions, and shows no signs of stopping. Today we welcome our newest member to the war effort." A collective rustle of appendages, tentacles, and wing membranes filled the chamber. In the observation deck, the hulking Mordun representatives, each standing 3 meters tall with arms like tree trunks, exchanged glances with their 8 eyes. The ethereal Yilneth, beings of pure energy contained in crystalline shells, pulsed with what could only be described as cosmic laughter. "Behold," Kythera gestured toward the chamber's main entrance, "the delegation from Earth." 3 figures entered the vast chamber, and the silence transformed into barely suppressed mirth. They were small, laughably small. Their skin was pale pink, their limbs thin and seemingly fragile. No natural armor, no redundant organs visible through translucent flesh, no obvious weapons growing from their bodies. They wore simple cloth coverings and walked on only 2 legs, wobbling slightly in the low gravity. The lead human, who introduced himself as Ambassador Calum Vex, stood barely 1.8 meters tall. His companions, Commander Lyrix Norn and strategic analyst Vespera Quinn, looked even more unimpressive. When Calum spoke, his voice was soft, lacking the bone-rattling resonance of the Mordun or the harmonic frequencies of the Zephyrian songbirds. "Thank you for accepting Earth into this alliance," Calum said, his words triggering a wave of what the translator interpreted as chuckling across species lines. "We understand the gravity of this conflict and pledge our full support." High Commander Torgaveth of the Mordun rose from his massive seat, his forearms spread wide. "Little mammals," he rumbled, his voice causing the chamber's walls to vibrate. "This is not a playground conflict. The HFY have weapons that can crack moons. Their soldiers are 3 times your size, with hides that deflect plasma fire. What exactly do you propose to contribute?" Vespera stepped forward, her gray eyes scanning the assembled delegates with an intensity that made several species shift uncomfortably. "Intelligence," she said simply. "Analysis, strategy." The laughter this time was open and unrestrained. The crystalline Zilthari sang a harmony that roughly translated to "how adorable," while the gas giant-dwelling Nyxborians inflated their air sacs in what passed for their version of hilarity. "Strategy," scoffed Ambassador Prexnal of the Keth Mori, her serpentine neck weaving hypnotically. "Child beings, we have been waging war across the galaxy for millennia before your species discovered fire. The HFY are methodical, relentless, and utterly without mercy. They have conquered every world they've targeted. What could your tiny minds possibly offer?" Commander Lyrix, who had remained silent until now, smiled, a facial expression that several species found unsettling in its simplicity. "We've been observing your conflict for some time," she said. "With respect, you've been fighting this war entirely wrong." The chamber erupted in outraged protests, translator systems struggling to keep up with the cacophony of offended dignity. Calum raised his hand, a gesture so simple it somehow commanded attention. "We don't ask you to change your tactics immediately," he said, "but we do request permission to establish a small operational base. Let us prove our worth through actions rather than words." High Commander Torgaveth leaned forward, his massive frame casting shadows across the humans. "Very well, little mammals. We grant you 1 moon, Kepler 442c. It's already been targeted by the HFY. When they arrive next cycle to claim it, you can show us these miraculous strategies of yours." His 4 eyes gleamed with what might have been cruel amusement. "Those who survive can rejoin our discussions." As the humans filed out of the chamber, the laughter followed them. None of the delegates noticed how Vespera's gray eyes had memorized every face, every gesture, every dismissive comment. None saw how Calem's jaw had tightened almost imperceptibly, and absolutely none of them recognized the look that Commander Lyrics wore, because no species in the galaxy had ever seen a human smile like that and lived to describe it. The HFY had conquered 43 worlds using the same methodology: overwhelming force, predictable tactics, and the assumption that all species would fight as they always had. They had never encountered a species that had spent its entire evolutionary history perfecting the art of killing its own kind. The war was about to change in ways the galaxy could never have imagined. Kepler 442c was a dead rock floating in the terminus sector, its surface scarred by ancient meteor impacts and the remnants of failed mining operations. The Galactic Alliance had written it off decades ago. Too small to be strategic, too barren to be valuable. Perfect for expendable allies. Commander Lyrics Norn stood on the observation deck of the human transport vessel, Vindication, watching the gray moon grow larger through the reinforced viewport. Behind her, the steady hum of activity filled the corridors as her teams worked with mechanical precision. "Surface deployment complete," reported Lieutenant Jex Bramwell, his voice crisp through the comm system. "All equipment is in position." Lyrics nodded, though Bramwell couldn't see her. 3 weeks had passed since the Council's dismissive laughter, and in those 3 weeks, Earth had shown just how seriously it took this war. The Vindication hadn't come alone. 17 ships had made the journey from Sol, carrying not just personnel but something far more dangerous: human ingenuity applied to warfare. Strategic analyst Vespera Quinn materialized beside Lyrics, her footsteps so quiet they barely registered on the deck plating. In her hands was a data pad displaying tactical projections that would have made the Galactic Alliance's war planners weep with envy. "HFY fleet composition is exactly as predicted," Vespera reported, her gray eyes reflecting the pale light of the moon below. 47 capital ships, 231 support vessels, and approximately 80,000 ground troops. They'll arrive in 6 days. And our assets? In position. The Alliance observers won't detect anything until it's far too late. Vespera's voice carried a note of satisfaction that would have chilled the Galactic Council delegates had they heard it. "How long until the orbital stations are ready?" Lyrics checked her chronometer. 18 hours. Chief Engineer Coda assures me they'll be invisible to HFY sensors until activation. Down on the moon's surface, teams of humans worked in the airless environment with an efficiency that bordered on supernatural. They wore no bulky environmental suits like other species required. Instead, their gear was sleek, form-fitting, and allowed for full mobility. While the galaxy's other races needed massive atmospheric processors and environmental domes, humans had simply adapted. Chief Engineer Torval Coda supervised the installation of the final orbital platform, his weathered, hands steady despite the zero-gravity environment. Around him, his team moved like dancers, each knowing their role perfectly. The platforms themselves were marvels of human engineering, invisible to most sensors, powered by quantum batteries that could run for years, and equipped with weapons, systems that violated several galactic warfare conventions. "Coda to command," he transmitted. "Platform 7 is online. All systems are showing green across the board." On the surface, Captain Nexus Wolf of the Human Marine Corps was overseeing a different kind of preparation. His 800 Marines had transformed the barren moonscape into something that looked unchanged to orbital scans, but was actually a carefully designed killing field. "Remember," Wolf addressed his unit commanders, "the HFY have never faced human military doctrine. They've been fighting the same kind of war for centuries: massive formations, predictable advances, honor-bound combat. They're about to learn why Earth's history is written in blood." The HFY, despite their reputation for ruthless efficiency, were remarkably predictable. Vespera had spent months analyzing their previous conquests, identifying patterns that had remained consistent. Across dozens of worlds, They always began with an orbital bombardment to soften targets, followed by massive troop landings at predetermined sites, then a slow, methodical advance using overwhelming firepower. "Sir," called Sergeant Major Rivencross, approaching Wolf's position. "The volunteers from the penal battalions want to confirm their orders." Wolf's expression hardened. The volunteers were men and women who had committed crimes serious enough to warrant death sentences on Earth. Murderers, war criminals, those who had crossed lines that even human society couldn't tolerate. But they had one thing the galaxy had never seen: human capacity for absolute unrestricted violence. "Tell them their records will be expunged if they survive," Wolf replied, "and remind them that the HFY consider all captured enemies to be livestock." Meanwhile, Ambassador Calum Vex remained in the diplomatic ship, maintaining contact with the Galactic Alliance observers. His role was perhaps the most crucial. He needed to ensure that when the real fighting began, the Alliance would be watching. "Ambassador, Prexnall sends her regards," came the transmission from the Alliance monitoring station. "She's eager to see how your strategies perform against HFY efficiency." Calum smiled that same unsettling smile from the council chambers. "Please convey to the ambassador that she won't be disappointed. Earth always delivers on its promises." As the sixth day arrived, long-range sensors detected the HFY fleet approaching the system. They came in their traditional formation, a massive wedge of capital ships surrounded by support vessels, moving with the ponderous confidence of a force that had never known defeat. Fleet Commander Korthvel stood on the bridge of his flagship, the dominator of worlds, watching the tactical display with satisfaction. The intelligence reports on this new species called humans had been laughable. Small, fragile creatures with no natural weapons, trying to make their mark in a war between titans. "Begin standard bombardment pattern," he ordered, his mandibles clicking with anticipation. "We'll make this quick and clean. I want to be back in civilized space before the next cycle." What Korthvel didn't know was that 17 human ships were already in the system, had been for weeks, completely invisible to his sensors. What he couldn't comprehend was that every move his fleet made had been anticipated, calculated, and prepared for by minds that had spent millennia perfecting the art of war. The humans weren't just ready for the HFY, they were hungry for. The HFY bombardment began at 800 Standard Galactic Time, exactly as Vespera Quinn had predicted. 47 capital ships opened fire simultaneously, their plasma batteries turning the surface of Kepler 442c into a hellscape of molten rock and superheated gas. The display was magnificent, a textbook example of HFY doctrine that had reduced countless worlds to submission. Fleet Commander Korthvel watched the tactical display with satisfaction, his compound eyes tracking the energy signatures of the bombardment. "Efficient," he muttered to his second-in-command, Sub-Commander Thexnell. "The human positions should be completely eliminated within the hour." 3 light minutes away, aboard the Alliance monitoring station Arbiter of Truth, Ambassador Prexnall coiled her serpentine body around her observation post. The screens showed the devastating bombardment in real time, and she felt a moment of something that might have been pity for the foolish mammals who had dared to challenge the HFY. "How tragic," she mused to her aide. "Though perhaps this will teach the Alliance not to accept every primitive species that applies for membership." What neither the HFY nor the Alliance observers realized was that the bombardment was hitting precisely nothing of value. The human positions were 60 meters underground, carved into the moon's bedrock with molecular precision. The surface installations that were being obliterated were carefully constructed decoys, complete with false energy signatures and thermal readings. Deep in the moon's core, Commander Lyrix Norn watched the bombardment through quantum-linked sensors, her expression completely calm. Around her, the primary command center hummed with quiet activity as her staff monitored thousands of data streams. "Bombardment pattern is holding exactly to predicted parameters," reported Tactical Officer Zaravos. "They're expending approximately 40% of their total ordnance on empty rock. Phase 1 complete, Lyrics announced to her team. Initiate Phase 2. Above the moon's surface, invisible to all scanners, the 7 orbital platforms that Chief Engineer Coda had installed began to power up. Each platform was no larger than a standard transport pod, but they contained technology that the Galactic Alliance's best scientists couldn't have imagined. The platforms didn't attack the HFY fleet. That would come later. Instead, they began broadcasting a very specific type of electromagnetic pulse, one calibrated to interfere with HFY neural frequencies. The effect was subtle, almost undetectable, but devastating in its implications. Aboard the Dominator of Worlds, Fleet Commander Korthvel suddenly found his thoughts fuzzy. Navigation calculations that should have been instinctive required conscious effort. Tactical assessments that normally took seconds stretched into minutes. Across the fleet, HFY commanders began making small errors in judgment, minor miscalculations that would compound over time. "Sir," Sub-Commander Thexnal reported, "ground assault teams are ready for deployment." Korthvel nodded, though the motion felt strangely delayed. "Proceed with standard landing protocols." 231 troop transports descended toward Kepler Form 42C, their hulls glowing red-hot from atmospheric entry. Each transport carried 350 HFY warriors, creatures that stood over 2.5 meters tall, with natural chitinous armor and reflexes fast enough to dodge plasma fire. The landing sites had been chosen according to millennium-old doctrine: establish beachheads at strategic points, then advance methodically to crush any remaining resistance. It was a strategy that had never failed. Captain Nexus Wolf crouched in his concealed position, watching the first transports touch down through his enhanced optics. Around him, 800 human Marines waited in absolute silence, their positions invisible even to HFY thermal sensors. "Contact in 60 seconds, he whispered into his comm system. "Remember, let them establish their perimeter. We want them confident." The HFY ground forces deployed with practiced efficiency, their formations spreading across the landing zones like clockwork. They moved with the confidence of apex predators, weapons ready but not particularly alert. After all, the orbital bombardment should have eliminated any significant resistance. Squad leader Mextoth led his unit across the blasted landscape, his multiple eyes scanning for any signs of surviving human forces. The intelligence reports had indicated that humans were primarily visual hunters, with limited sensory capabilities, no threat to a properly equipped HFY warrior. That assessment was about to prove catastrophically wrong. The first human emerged from the ground 3 meters behind Mextoth's squad. He had been buried under a meter of rubble for 6 hours, completely motionless, breathing through a filtration system so advanced it left no thermal signature. His weapon was something the HFY had never encountered: a kinetic accelerator that fired depleted uranium projectiles at a significant fraction of light speed. The projectile punched through Mextoth's chitinous armor like it was paper, the kinetic energy creating a wound cavity that liquefied his internal organs. He was dead before his body hit the ground. Across the landing zones, similar scenes played out as human Marines emerged from positions that should have been impossible to survive. They moved with a fluid grace that seemed to defy the moon's gravity, their weapons firing with mechanical precision. Every shot found its target. Every target died. "What is this?" Sub-Commander Thexnal demanded, watching his tactical display as squads of elite HFY warriors simply vanished from the sensors. "Where are these attacks coming from?" Fleet Commander Korthvel stared at the display, his thoughts still sluggish from the neural interference. The humans were supposed to be simple, primitive creatures. The intelligence reports had said so, but the tactical data coming from the surface suggested something else entirely. Predators of a sophistication that the galaxy had never seen. "Increase orbital support," he ordered. "Eliminate these anomalies." The capital ships redirected their fire toward the surface engagement zones, but the humans had anticipated this as well. They moved through the bombardment like ghosts, using the HFY's own firepower to mask their positions while systematically dismantling the ground forces. Sergeant Major Riven Cross led a squad of the human volunteers, the criminals and killers who had been given a chance at redemption. They fought with a brutality that transcended mere tactics, employing methods of warfare that would have horrified even the warlike Morden. "Remember," Cross whispered to his team as they prepared to engage a HFY command unit, "these things, consider us livestock. Let's show them what happens when the livestock fights back." The engagement lasted 7 minutes. When it was over, the HFY command unit had been completely eliminated, but not cleanly. The humans had taken prisoners, something unprecedented in HFY military history. What they did with those prisoners in the following hours would become the subject of terrified whispers throughout the galaxy. As the day progressed, the impossible became undeniable. The human forces were winning. Not just holding their ground or fighting valiantly, winning decisively against the most feared military force in the galaxy. Fleet Commander Korthvel stood before his tactical display, his mind reeling with implications he couldn't quite grasp. In 12 hours of fighting, he had lost 60% of his ground forces and gained exactly 0 territory. The humans weren't just fighting back, they were hunting his warriors like prey. "Sir," Subcommander Thexnall reported, his voice carrying a note of fear that Korthvel had never heard from a HFY officer. "We're receiving a transmission from the human commander." The main screen flickered to life, revealing Commander Lyrix Norn standing in what appeared to be an underground command center. Her expression was completely calm, almost serene as she looked directly into the camera. "Fleet Commander Korthvel," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the void. "I am Commander Lyrix Norn of the Earth Defense Forces. I have a message for you." Behind her, visible in the background, were captured HFY warriors chained to posts. They were alive, but something in their eyes suggested they might have preferred death. "You have invaded human territory," Lyrix continued. "You have threatened human allies. Most importantly, you have underestimated human resolve. I want you to understand something very clearly. This isn't a battle you're fighting. It's an execution." The transmission ended, leaving the bridge of the Dominator of Worlds in absolute silence. For the first time in HFY history, a fleet commander contemplated retreat. The Galactic Alliance monitoring station Arbiter of Truth had fallen into stunned silence. Ambassador Prexnall's serpentine form was coiled so tightly around her observation post that her aide worried she might cut off her own circulation. The tactical displays showed something that violated every principle of modern warfare. "The HFY. We're losing. This is impossible," she hissed, her forked tongue flicking nervously. "The data must be corrupted. Check the sensors again." Her aide, a nervous Zilthari crystalline being, sang a harmony of confirmation mixed with bewilderment. "All sensors are functioning normally, Ambassador. The humans have eliminated 73% of HFY ground forces and are now hunting the survivors." The word hunting was carefully chosen. What the humans were doing couldn't be described as conventional warfare. They moved through the HFY forces like phantoms, appearing from impossible positions, striking with surgical precision, then vanishing before retaliation was possible. Worse, they were taking prisoners. And what they were doing with those prisoners was sending waves of terror through the remaining HFY forces. Aboard the Dominator of Worlds, Fleet Commander Korthvel was experiencing something no HFY military leader had felt in over 8 centuries. Fear. His tactical officers clustered around holographic displays that showed their ground forces being systematically dismantled by an enemy that shouldn't have existed. "Sir," Subcommander Thexnall reported, his mandibles clicking with agitation. "We're receiving another transmission from the humans." The main screen activated, revealing a scene that would haunt Korthvel's dreams for the rest of his life. Captain Nexus Wolf stood in what appeared to be a makeshift interrogation chamber, and beside him was squad leader Mextoth, alive but broken in ways that went far beyond physical injury. "Fleet Commander," Wolf said, his voice carrying the casual tone of someone discussing weather, "Your ground commander here has provided us with some fascinating intelligence about HFY fleet operations. Did you know that your species has never developed effective countermeasures against psychological warfare? Behind Wolf, Mextoth, a warrior who had conquered 17 worlds, whimpered. The sound was alien and wrong, coming from a HFY throat. We've learned so much about your command structure, your tactical doctrine, even your fleet deployment patterns, Wolf continued. Your warriors are remarkably talkative once they understand the alternatives. The transmission shifted to show a wider view of the chamber. Along the walls were dozens of captured HFY, all alive, all conscious, all bearing expressions of absolute terror. Whatever the humans had done to them hadn't involved conventional torture. It was something far more sophisticated and infinitely more devastating. I'm sending you a gift, Wolf announced, and the screen showed human Marines loading something into an escape pod. A few of your warriors who are eager to rejoin your fleet. I think you'll find their perspective on this conflict has evolved. The escape pod launched toward the HFY fleet, its trajectory perfectly calculated to be intercepted by their picket ships. When Korthavel's forces recovered it 2 hours later, they found 12 HFY warriors inside, physically unharmed, but psychologically shattered. Whatever the humans had done to them had broken something fundamental in their minds. The recovered warriors could only babble about the endless dark, the questions that never stop, and the humans who know everything. Medical scans showed no physical trauma, but their neural patterns indicated severe psychological breakdown. Strategic analyst Vespera Quinn stood in the Human Command Center, monitoring the psychological impact of their operations through quantum-linked surveillance systems placed throughout the HFY fleet. Her gray eyes tracked dozens of data streams as she watched an entire military force begin to unravel from within. Morale degradation is proceeding faster than projected, she reported to Commander Lyrix. HFY psychology is remarkably fragile when confronted with unpredictable variables. Their entire culture is built on certainty and overwhelming superiority. And now they're facing an enemy they can't understand, using tactics they've never encountered, achieving results they believed impossible, Lyrix replied. How long until complete collapse? At current rates, 18 hours. The human strategy was more sophisticated than anyone in the galaxy could have imagined. While the Marines on the surface were eliminating HFY ground forces, the real battle was being fought in the realm of information and psychology. Every action was calculated to maximum psychological impact, every victory designed to spread fear and confusion through the enemy ranks. Chief Engineer Torval Koda activated the final phase of his orbital platforms, and across the HFY fleet, critical systems began experiencing seemingly random failures. Navigation computers developed calculation errors, weapon systems experienced power fluctuations, communication arrays transmitted messages with subtle alterations that turned routine reports into confusing contradictions. Sir, a HFY communications officer reported to Korthavel. We're receiving contradictory orders from Fleet Command. I gave no orders, Korthavel replied. But even as he spoke, he wondered if that was true. His thoughts had been unclear since the battle began, and now he couldn't be certain of anything. On the surface of Kepler 442c, the final HFY stronghold was preparing for what they hoped would be a last stand. Commander Vexnal had barricaded his remaining forces in a defensive position, determined to sell their lives dearly against the human phantoms. Warriors of the hegemony, he broadcast to his troops. We face an enemy unlike any in our history, but we are HFY. We have conquered 43 worlds. We will not be defeated by these. He paused, realizing he didn't have adequate words to describe what the humans had become in the minds of his soldiers. They weren't just enemies. They had transformed into something mythological, creatures of nightmare that violated everything the HFY understood about warfare. Sergeant Major Riven Cross and his volunteer squad were the first to reach the HFY stronghold. They moved with the fluid precision of apex predators, their enhanced equipment allowing them to see through walls, track movement through thermal signatures, and coordinate attacks with inhuman precision. Remember, Cross whispered to his team, we want survivors. Command has plans for them. The assault on the stronghold lasted exactly 43 minutes. When it was over, the last organized HFY resistance on Kepler 442c had ceased to exist. Commander Vexnall found himself in human custody, staring into the gray eyes of Vespera Quinn as she prepared to begin the next phase of psychological operations. Commander, she said, her voice carrying a note of professional interest, you're going to help us send a message to your fleet. A very specific message about the futility of challenging human resolve. Fleet Commander Korthvel received that message 6 hours later. Commander Vexnall appeared on his screen, technically unharmed, but speaking in a flat, emotionless tone that sent chills through every HFY on the bridge. Fleet Commander, Vexnall said, I have been educated about the true nature of our enemy. The humans are not what our intelligence reported. They are something else entirely. They are what we would have become if we had spent our entire evolutionary history perfecting the art of killing our own kind. The transmission continued for 27 minutes, with Vexnall describing in clinical detail exactly what the humans were capable of. By the time it ended, several HFY officers had requested immediate medical attention for stress-induced neural breakdown. Sir, Subcommander Vexnall reported, his voice barely above a whisper, we're receiving surrender requests from 17 ships in the fleet. Korthvel stared at the tactical display, watching his invincible armada dissolve before his eyes. In less than 48 hours, the humans had accomplished something unprecedented in galactic history. They had broken the HFY hegemony through superior warfare doctrine and psychological manipulation. Open a channel to the human commander, he ordered, the words tasting like poison in his mouth. When Commander Lyrics appeared on his screen, she was smiling that same unsettling human expression that had confused the Galactic Council. But now Korthvel understood what that smile meant. It was the expression of a predator that had been waiting patiently for its prey, to realize it was already dead. Fleet Commander, Lyrics said pleasantly, are you ready to discuss terms? The surrender of the HFY fleet sent shockwaves through the galaxy that reached far beyond the Terminus sector. In the Galactic Council chamber, emergency sessions were being called as news of the impossible victory spread from system to system. High Commander Torgavith of the Morden stood before the Great Assembly, his 4 massive arms trembling with what might have been rage or fear. This is inconceivable, he rumbled, his voice causing the chamber's crystalline walls to vibrate. The HFY have never been defeated in open warfare. Never. Ambassador Kithara's chitinous exoskeleton clicked rhythmically as she processed the tactical reports. The data is confirmed across multiple sources, she announced. Fleet Commander Korthvel has surrendered his entire armada to human forces. 47 capital ships, 231 support vessels, and the surviving ground forces are now in human custody. The implications were staggering. The HFY hegemony had been the galaxy's primary military threat for over 3 centuries. Their methodical conquest of world after world had seemed unstoppable, their military doctrine refined through countless victories. Now, a species that had been dismissed as primitive mammals had destroyed their most powerful fleet in less than 72 hours. But perhaps more disturbing than the victory itself was what the humans had done with their prisoners. Ambassador. Prexnall coiled her serpentine form around her speaking platform, her voice carrying notes of barely controlled hysteria. The humans aren't just holding HFY prisoners, she reported. They're studying them, converting them. The psychological profiles we're receiving from the survivors indicate complete mental restructuring. On Kepler 442c, Commander Lyrics, Norn walked through the converted HFY detention facility with the calm satisfaction of someone whose plans had proceeded exactly as intended. The facility had been carved from the moon's bedrock using molecular disassemblers, creating a complex that was simultaneously a prison, research center, and psychological conditioning facility. Strategic analyst Vespera Quinn met her at the central observation deck, carrying data pads filled with information that would have sent the Galactic Council into panic if they had seen it. The neurological mapping is complete, Vespera reported. HFY psychology is remarkably uniform across their species, a product of genetic engineering that occurred approximately 8,000 years ago. They essentially bred out individuality in favor of collective efficiency, which makes them vulnerable to coordinated psychological pressure, Lyrics observed. What about the command structure intelligence? Vespera's gray eyes gleamed with professional satisfaction. Fleet Commander Korthvel has provided complete strategic databases for the entire hegemony. Ship deployments, supply lines, communication, protocols, even the locations of their homeworlds. The conditioning process was more effective than our models predicted. The conditioning process was something that violated every principle of galactic warfare conventions, but the humans had never signed those conventions. While other species focused on physical conquest or simple destruction, humans had developed methods of psychological warfare that bordered on the supernatural. They didn't just defeat enemies, they converted them into assets. Captain Nexus Wolf entered the observation deck, his expression carrying the grim satisfaction of a professional soldier who had just completed a perfect operation. Sir, the final batch of subjects has completed processing. We now have operational intelligence on HFY fleet movements throughout the entire hegemony. Casualties? Lyrics inquired. Minimal. 17 wounded. No fatalities. Medical reports that all wounded personnel will return to active duty within the week. The numbers were almost impossible to believe. Human forces had destroyed the most feared military organization in the galaxy while suffering casualties that wouldn't have been significant in a training exercise. This wasn't just victory. It was a demonstration of tactical superiority so complete that it challenged fundamental assumptions about galactic warfare. Chief Engineer Torval Koda materialized beside them, his weathered face showing the quiet pride of someone whose equipment had performed beyond specifications. The orbital platforms have finished their data collection, he reported. We have complete sensor readings on HFY technology, including their supposedly classified stealth systems and quantum communication networks. Analysis? Lyrics asked. Impressive engineering, but not particularly innovative. They've been using the same basic designs for centuries, just scaling them up for larger vessels. No adaptive systems, no evolutionary pressure to improve their technology. Koda's expression suggested professional disappointment. They became complacent. The human victory was revealing something that the galaxy had never understood about the HFY. They were evolutionarily stagnant. Their conquest-based society had created military efficiency, but stifled innovation. They had become so successful, using their traditional methods, that they had never developed countermeasures against unconventional warfare. Meanwhile, humanity had spent its entire history fighting the most dangerous enemy possible, itself. Every human military doctrine had been developed in response to other humans using the same techniques. The result was a species that instinctively understood adaptation, innovation, and the kind of creative thinking that turned apparent weaknesses into decisive advantages. Ambassador Calum Vex stood in the communication center of the human diplomatic vessel, preparing to address the Galactic Council. The message he was about to send would reshape the galaxy's understanding of humanity's place in galactic politics. Council members, he began, his voice carrying the same quiet confidence that had unsettled the delegates during his first appearance. The HFY threat has been neutralized. Their fleet has surrendered, their ground forces have been eliminated, and their command structure has been compromised. He paused, allowing the implications to settle. However, our analysis of HFY strategic databases has revealed something of greater concern. The hegemony was not acting independently. They were being supplied and coordinated by elements within the Galactic Alliance itself. The transmission that followed contained intelligence that would trigger the largest political upheaval in galactic history. HFY records showed extensive financial and logistical support from several major Alliance member species, creating a shadow war economy that had prolonged the conflict for decades while enriching those who profited from it. We have detailed financial records, Kylum continued, communications logs and strategic agreements between HFY leadership and Alliance Council members. The war that has consumed billions of lives was being artificially sustained by those who claimed to oppose it. In the council chamber, the reception of this message created chaos that made the earlier laughter seem like polite conversation. "Hi." Commander Torgaveth rose from his seat with such violence that his massive frame cracked the reinforced platform beneath him. "Lies," he bellowed, his forearms gesturing wildly. "Human deception. They seek to divide us now that they have somehow defeated the HFY through trickery." But Ambassador Cathara was already accessing the transmitted data through her neural implants, her compound eyes processing information at superhuman speeds. What she saw made her chitinous exoskeleton click in patterns that roughly translated to horrified understanding. "The financial records are authentic," she announced, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Quantum encrypted, biometrically sealed, and cross-referenced with Alliance banking systems. The Mordoon Military Consortium has been supplying the HFY with advanced weapons for the past 47 years. The silence that followed was deafening. Torgaveth's massive form seemed to shrink as the implications became clear. If the humans had obtained complete HFY intelligence databases, then every secret deal, every under-the-table transaction, every species that had profited from the endless war was now exposed. Furthermore, Cathara continued, her voice gaining strength as she processed more data, the Keth Mori Syndicate has been providing them with strategic intelligence about Alliance fleet movements. The Zilthari Collective has been supplying them with quantum communication technology, and the Yilneth Ascendancy has been sharing energy being research that allowed the HFY to develop their psychic interference weapons. One by one, the species that had been profiting from the war found themselves exposed. The conflict that had seemed like an existential threat to galactic civilization had actually been a carefully managed business venture, with the HFY serving as a controllable enemy that justified massive military spending and resource allocation. "The humans have records of over 200 separate agreements," Cathara announced, her voice now carrying undertones of what might have been respect. "Financial transactions, technology transfers, and strategic coordination meetings. They know everything." Ambassador Prexnall's serpentine form had gone completely rigid. "How is this possible?" she whispered. "HFY command protocols are genetically locked. Their officers cannot reveal strategic information even under extreme duress." The answer came from Calum's transmission, his voice carrying that same unsettling calm. "The HFY command protocols were designed to prevent information extraction through conventional means. Pain, fear, chemical interrogation. But humans have developed psychological techniques that bypass those protections entirely. We don't torture information from our subjects. We convince them to share it willingly. The method was something that no species in the galaxy had conceived of because it required understanding psychology at a level that approached artistry. The humans hadn't broken the HFY commanders. They had convinced them that cooperation was the only logical choice, that resistance was fundamentally irrational, that sharing information was actually in their own best interests. The HFY officers we have in custody genuinely believe they are helping us save the galaxy," Calum explained. "They have been shown evidence of the corruption within their own command structure, the way they were being used as pawns by Alliance members, who profited from prolonged conflict. Their surrender wasn't the result of coercion, it was the result of enlightenment." Strategic analyst Vespera Quinn had perfected the psychological conditioning process during her months of preparation. She had studied not just HFY psychology, but the psychology of every species that might be involved in the larger conflict. The result was a method of persuasion so sophisticated that subjects didn't even realize they were being influenced. "The key," she explained to Commander Lyrics as they watched the latest group of HFY officers complete their conditioning, "is that we don't change what they believe. We simply show them the logical consequences of their existing beliefs. Once they understand that their entire purpose, bringing order to the galaxy, was being subverted by the very species they thought they were fighting, cooperation becomes inevitable. The transformed HFY officers were now serving as advisors to human forces, providing strategic intelligence and tactical support with genuine enthusiasm. They had been shown evidence of the larger conspiracy, proof that their conquests were being deliberately limited, and managed to maintain profitable conflict rather than achieve actual victory. "It's beautiful, in a way," one of the converted commanders, Nextar, explained to his human handlers. "We spent centuries believing we were creating order, but we were actually perpetuating chaos for the benefit of those who claimed to oppose us. The humans have shown us what true order looks like." Back in the council chamber, the political implications of the human revelations were becoming clear. The exposure of the shadow war economy meant that the Alliance's power structure was about to collapse entirely. Species that had presented themselves as defenders of galactic freedom were revealed as war profiteers who had prolonged suffering for financial gain. But perhaps more terrifying than the political scandal was the demonstration of human capabilities. In 72 hours, they had not only defeated the galaxy's most feared military force, but had also unraveled a conspiracy that had shaped galactic politics for decades. They had shown that human warfare doctrine was so far advanced that it operated on levels that other species couldn't even comprehend. The question now, Kalem's transmission continued, is what the Galaxy Council intends to do with this information. The HFY hegemony has surrendered and is prepared to make reparations to the worlds they conquered. The conspiracy that sustained this war has been exposed. The choice of how to proceed lies with the Alliance. The transmission ended, leaving the council chamber in absolute silence. Every delegate was processing the same terrifying realization. Humanity had just demonstrated that they could destroy any military force in the galaxy, uncover any conspiracy, and manipulate any species with techniques that bordered on supernatural. Commander Torgaveth slowly settled back into his seat, his massive frame trembling with something that might have been fear or awe. "What?" he asked in a voice barely above a whisper. "What do the humans want from us?" The human response came, not as a transmission to the Galactic Council, but as a series of simultaneous actions across 17 star systems. While the Council debated the implications of the HFY intelligence, human fleets materialized at strategic points throughout Alliance space, not as invaders, but as peacekeepers arriving to restore order to a galaxy that was rapidly descending into chaos. Commander Lyrix Norn stood on the bridge of the Vindication, now serving as the flagship of the human expeditionary force. Around her, holographic displays showed the positions of human ships throughout the galaxy. Each vessel was small by Alliance standards, but the galaxy had learned not to judge human capabilities by conventional metrics. "Status report," she requested. "All fleets are in position," reported Tactical Officer Zara Voss. "The Mordoon Consortium has locked down their military assets in response to the corruption revelations. The Keth Mori Syndicate is attempting to flee to the Outer Rim. The Zilthari Collective has requested immediate negotiations." Lyrix nodded, her expression remaining calm despite the magnitude of the operation. In the span of a single week, humanity had gone from being a minor Alliance member to being the de facto military authority in the galaxy. The revelation of the shadow war economy had shattered the existing power structure, and human forces were now the only military organization that hadn't been compromised by the conspiracy. And the HFY integration? Proceeding ahead of schedule. The converted officers are providing intelligence on hegemony infrastructure throughout the galaxy. We should have complete operational control of their former territories within the month. The speed of the transition was remarkable. The HFY, once the galaxy's most feared conquerors, had become humanity's most enthusiastic allies. Their conversion hadn't been forced. It had been voluntary, the result of psychological conditioning so sophisticated that the subjects genuinely believed they were making the right choice. Strategic analyst Vespera Quinn materialized beside Lyrix, her gray eyes tracking dozens of data streams simultaneously. "The political situation is stabilizing faster than projected," she reported. 17 species have formally requested human protection from the conspiracy fallout. The remaining alliance members are either fleeing or attempting to negotiate separate peace agreements. And the Galactic Council? Disbanded as of this morning. Ambassador Cathara transmitted formal dissolution documents, citing irreparable corruption of democratic processes. The alliance as we knew it no longer exists. The collapse of the Galactic Alliance had been inevitable once the extent of the corruption became clear. The revelation that the Vrextai War had been artificially sustained for profit had shattered public trust in galactic institutions. Worlds that had sacrificed billions for the war effort now knew that their suffering had been deliberately prolonged by those who claimed to protect them. But into this chaos, humanity had stepped forward with a solution. Ambassador Calum Vex stood before the reformed Galactic Assembly, addressing representatives from 37 species who had survived the political upheaval. His message was simple but revolutionary. Humanity would establish a new galactic order based on actual peace rather than managed conflict. The old system failed because it incentivized war, he explained, his voice carrying across the chamber. With quiet authority, military contractors profited from conflict, political leaders gained power through fear, economic systems depended on resource allocation for endless warfare. The result was a galaxy locked in perpetual suffering. Behind him, holographic displays showed the human proposal, a galactic government based on actual cooperation rather than competitive advantage. Military forces would be unified under human command, ensuring that no species could develop this independent power base necessary for war profiteering. Trade would be managed through transparent systems that eliminated the economic incentives for conflict. "This is not conquest," Calum continued. "This is evolution. Humanity is offering to take on the burden of galactic defense so that your species can focus on growth, exploration, and cultural development. We will handle the difficult decisions, the necessary sacrifices, the complex strategic planning that true peace requires." The representatives listened in stunned silence. The human proposal was unprecedented, a single species volunteering to become the galaxy's military and political authority, taking on the responsibility of maintaining order across thousands of worlds. "And if we refuse?" asked Ambassador Velthar of the Rixialian Confederacy. Calum's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes suggested that refusal wasn't really an option. "Then you will face the same chaos that destroyed the Alliance." "The old system is gone, Ambassador. The only question is whether you will participate in building something better, or whether you will cling to the wreckage of something that was never sustainable." The demonstration of human capabilities had made the choice clear. Species that had spent centuries believing they were military powers had watched humanity dismantle the galaxy's most feared enemy in less than a week. The psychological warfare techniques that had converted the Vrextai could be applied to any species that chose opposition over cooperation. Captain Nexus Wolf coordinated the integration of former Vrextai territories into the new human-controlled galactic government. His Marines had become peacekeepers, arriving on worlds that had been under hegemony occupation for decades and implementing reconstruction programs that seemed impossible in their scope and efficiency. "The key," he explained to his unit commanders, "is that we're not conquering these worlds. We're liberating them. The populations see us as saviors, not invaders. That gives us a level of cooperation that traditional occupying forces never achieve." The C-Day human approach to galactic governance was unlike anything in recorded history. Rather than imposing their culture or political system, they simply provided security and infrastructure, while allowing local populations to manage their own affairs. The result was a form of benevolent hegemony that actually improved life for the species under human protection. Chief Engineer Torval Koda supervised the deployment of human technology throughout the galaxy. The same quantum engineering that had created invisible orbital weapons platforms was now being used to build communication networks transportation systems, and industrial infrastructure that surpassed anything the galaxy had ever seen. The irony, he mused to his engineering teams, is that we're using our military technology to create peace. The same systems that made us invisible to HFY sensors are now providing security for trade routes. The psychological warfare techniques that converted their officers are being used to resolve ethnic conflicts and resource disputes. Within 6 months, the galaxy had transformed. Worlds that had been devastated by the HFY war were being rebuilt with human assistance. Trade routes that had been disrupted by decades of conflict were operating more efficiently than ever before. Species that had been enemies for centuries were cooperating under human mediation. The transformation wasn't without resistance. The Outer Rim territories, led by the remnants of the Mordoon Military Consortium, attempted to establish an independent military alliance. Their rebellion lasted exactly 13 days before human forces arrived to restore order. The speed and efficiency of the operation sent a clear message to any other species considering resistance. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the new galactic order was how genuinely peaceful it had become. The elimination of war profiteering had removed the economic incentives for conflict. The consolidation of military power under human control had eliminated the possibility of large-scale warfare. The psychological conditioning techniques that had converted the HFY were being used to resolve disputes before they could escalate to violence. Sergeant Major Riven Cross, the former criminal who had found redemption in the HFY war, now served as a senior advisor in the human peacekeeping forces. His experience with the darker aspects of human nature made him uniquely qualified to understand the psychological techniques that maintained galactic stability. The beautiful thing, he explained to a group of newly converted HFY officers, is that we're not forcing peace on the galaxy. We're making peace the only logical choice. When war becomes impossible and cooperation becomes profitable, even the most aggressive species will choose collaboration. The galaxy had learned what the HFY had discovered. Resistance to human authority wasn't just futile, it was irrational. Humanity had demonstrated that they could provide security, prosperity, and stability more effectively than any previous galactic government. Opposition meant choosing conflict over cooperation, suffering over prosperity, chaos over order. As the first year of human galactic governance drew to a close, the results spoke for themselves. Galactic trade had increased by 300%. Territorial disputes had been reduced to less than 1% of previous levels. Quality of life indicators had improved across every measured metric. The galaxy that had once echoed with the laughter of species mocking human weakness now resonated with something far more profound, the sound of genuine peace. But humanity's greatest achievement wasn't the military victory over the HFY, or the exposure of the conspiracy, or even the establishment of galactic government. Their greatest achievement was something that no species in galactic history had ever accomplished. They had made war obsolete. The galaxy had learned that when humans promised to end a war, they meant it literally. 5 years after the HFY surrender, the galaxy bore little resemblance to the war-torn collection of competing species that had once defined galactic civilization. From the bustling trade hubs of the core worlds to the newly terraformed colonies of the Outer Rim, a single truth had become self-evident. Humanity had delivered on its promise to end war itself. Commander Lyrix Norn, now holding the title of Galactic Security Coordinator, stood in the observation deck of the Vindication as it orbited the planet New Harmony, a world that had been a devastated battlefield 5 years ago and was now a thriving center of interspecies cooperation. The transformation was visible from orbit. Vast cities where multiple species lived and worked together, agricultural zones that combined the best techniques from dozens of worlds, and industrial complexes that produced technologies beyond what any single species could have achieved alone. Final integration report, she requested from her aide, who had once been Commander Vexenal of the HFY ground forces. All former hegemony territories are now fully integrated into the Galactic Cooperative, Vexnall reported, his tone carrying the satisfaction of someone who had found genuine purpose after decades of meaningless conquest. The last holdout settlements have requested membership rather than continue independent operations. The economic advantages of cooperation have become impossible to ignore. Lyric smiled, that same expression that had once terrified the Galactic Council. But now it represented something different, the satisfaction of a job completed to perfection. Humanity had done more than win a war. They had eliminated the concept of war itself from galactic civilization. Strategic analyst Vespera Quinn approached from the command center, her gray eyes reflecting the light of New Harmony's twin suns. In her hands was a datapad containing the Quarterly Stability Report, a document that would have seemed like fantasy fiction just 5 years earlier. Interspecies conflict incidents are down to 0 for the 3rd consecutive quarter, she reported. Economic productivity has increased by 400% over pre-war levels. Population growth is at historic highs across all member species. We have achieved something unprecedented in galactic history, genuine stability. The key to humanity's success hadn't been superior firepower or advanced technology, though they possessed both. The key had been understanding that war was not an inevitable result of species differences, but a manufactured product of flawed political and economic systems. Once those systems were replaced with structures that made cooperation more profitable than conflict, peace became not just possible, but inevitable. Ambassador Calum Vex transmitted his annual address to the Galactic Cooperative from the chambers of what had once been the Galactic Council. The chamber had been redesigned to accommodate not just the species that had survived the transition, but the dozens of new species that had requested membership in the cooperative. The galaxy was expanding, exploring and discovering, activities that had been impossible during the centuries of endless warfare. 5 years ago, Calum began, many of you laughed when Earth joined the war against the Vrextai hegemony. You saw us as primitive, weak, incapable of contributing to the galactic community. Today, that laughter has been replaced by something far more valuable. The laughter of children who have never known war. The laughter of families united across species lines. The laughter of beings who are free to pursue their dreams without fear of conquest or exploitation. The transformation had been more profound than political or military. It had been psychological and cultural. Species that had defined themselves through competition and conflict had discovered new identities based on cooperation and mutual benefit. The Morden, once the galaxy's most feared warriors, had become master engineers and architects. The Kethmori, former information brokers and spies, had evolved into galactic diplomats and cultural exchange specialists. Even the Vrextai had found new purpose. Their legendary discipline and organizational abilities, once used for conquest, were now directed toward massive infrastructure projects that benefited the entire galaxy. Former hegemony officers worked alongside human engineers to build interstellar transportation networks, communication systems, and terraforming projects that turned dead worlds into thriving colonies. Captain Nexus Wolf, now serving as director of peacekeeping operations, rarely needed to deploy his forces for conflict resolution. Instead, human peacekeepers served as mediators, investigators, and emergency responders. Their reputation for psychological sophistication and tactical superiority meant that most disputes were resolved simply by requesting human arbitration. The interesting thing, Wolf explained to a group of new recruits, is that we've become more effective by fighting less. When every species in the galaxy knows that conflict is impossible to win and cooperation is profitable to pursue, our job becomes maintaining systems rather than fighting battles. The human approach to galactic governance had proven that the most effective use of overwhelming military superiority was to make its deployment unnecessary. The demonstration of human capabilities during the Vrextai War had been so complete that no species had attempted military resistance to the new order. They had learned that humans didn't just win wars, they made war itself obsolete. Chief Engineer Torval Koda supervised the completion of the Galactic Transit Network, a project that connected every inhabited world in the galaxy through quantum tunnel gates. The technology made interstellar travel instantaneous and eliminated the resource scarcity that had driven much of the previous conflict. "What we've built," he explained to his engineering teams, "is more than a transportation system. It's a nervous system for galactic civilization. When every world is connected to every other world, when resources can be shared instantaneously, when populations can relocate freely, the conditions that create conflict simply cease to exist." The transit network was more than infrastructure. It was the physical manifestation of humanity's vision for galactic civilization. A single, interconnected community where species differences were celebrated rather than feared, where cooperation was rewarded rather than competition, where the energy once devoted to warfare was redirected toward exploration and discovery. Sergeant Major Riven Cross, now serving as Director of Psychological Integration, had developed programs that helped species adapt to the new galactic order. His work with the HFY had evolved into comprehensive systems for helping any species transition from conflict-based to cooperation-based social structures. "The secret," he explained to a gathering of former military officers from various species, "is that we don't try to change who you are. We help you discover who you could become. Every species has the capacity for cooperation, creativity, and growth. War just prevented them from developing those capacities." The psychological conditioning techniques that had converted the HFY were now being used throughout the galaxy to help species overcome centuries of conditioned aggression and fear. But the process was voluntary. Species that chose to participate in the programs saw dramatic improvements in quality of life, economic productivity, and social stability. As the 5th anniversary of the HFY surrender approached, the galaxy prepared for what was being called the Unity Celebration, a festival that would bring representatives from every world in the cooperative together for the first time in galactic history. The celebration would take place on New Harmony, symbolizing the transformation from a galaxy of war to a galaxy of peace. But perhaps the most significant aspect of the Unity celebration was what it represented: a galaxy that had learned to laugh together rather than at each other. The same species that had once mocked human weakness now celebrated human wisdom. The laughter that had once been cruel was now joyful. The mockery that had once been dismissive was now appreciation. Commander Lyric stood in the command center of the Vindication, watching the celebration preparations through quantum-linked sensors. Ships from every corner of the galaxy were converging on New Harmony, carrying beings who had never expected to live in a universe without war. "Final status report," she requested. "All systems are optimal," reported Vexnal, his voice carrying pride in the organization he now served. "The galaxy is at peace. The cooperative is stable. The future is secure." Lyrics nodded, her expression reflecting the satisfaction of someone who had accomplished the impossible. Humanity had joined a galactic war as unknown primitives. They had ended it as the architects of a new form of civilization. They had transformed not just the balance of power, but the very concept of what galactic society could become. The laughter that had once greeted humanity's arrival in galactic politics had indeed ended. It had been replaced by something far more beautiful: the sound of a galaxy that had learned to sing in harmony. In the end, the greatest victory wasn't that humanity had won the war. The greatest victory was that they had made sure no one would ever have to fight one again. The galaxy that had laughed when Earth joined the war would remember forever that humanity hadn't just ended the war, they had ended the age of warfare itself, replacing it with something unprecedented in galactic history: the age of peace. And in that peace, every species had found something they had never dared to hope for: a future where their children could laugh without fear, dream without limitation, and reach for the stars without having to fight for the right to do so. The war was over, forever, and That was humanity's greatest gift to the galaxy. Not just victory, but the promise that victory would never again be necessary.